Major General Steve Bird Dog Purdy, and everybody knows in this room who General Purdy is, but as a quick review, he is the Honorable Calvelli's military deputy, and I think he's nodding his head right here in front. He's like, I've got a first-round draft pick, don't you, sir? Yeah, and for the past, prior to this job, he was the commander of Space Launch Delta 45. It's really for his vision. He's a futurist. He thinks about what can be, what can space look like 30, 50 years from now, and the gentlemen sitting next to him are pushing that envelope right now. Next is Lieutenant Colonel retired Scott Kid Poteet, a good friend of mine for years. Kid is a retired lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, former Thunderbird pilot. I like to say that I'm his hype boy because I just think he's one of the best humans on the planet. Ironman triathlete, he was the United States Air Force's representative multiple times to the Ironman triathlon in Hawaii, and overall just a solid human. So Kid, thanks for being here. And then Jared Isaacman. Jared is the CEO of Shift4, a credit card processing company, as well as an entrepreneur, clearly a great businessman and an astronaut. So Jared, Kid, Bird Dog, thank you for being here today. So SFA just wanted to give everybody a little bit of a break. We've had one theme the past couple of days, and we're going to change gears a little bit. I want you to think forward. I want you to say, how can we take what these gentlemen are doing and apply it to national security? If you're industry, if you're a guardian out there, we want you to just think of what can happen. What can we do? So we're going to start off with Kid. Many of them may or may not have seen the Netflix show called Countdown, which documented the unbelievable mission called Inspiration 4. Jared, it was about 3 years ago where you had this crazy idea. It was announced at the Super Bowl, so about 3 years ago, halftime Super Bowl, this commercial that popped up and said Inspiration 4. So Kid, if you would, as the mission director of Inspiration 4, can you take us through what the two of you were thinking when the Super Bowl commercial came out and said, oh, this is real, and then take us all the way through Splashdown?
So just for clarification, the title mission director, that's left for the actual experts, engineers that run mission control for SpaceX. My role during Inspiration 4 was more or less the logistics director on the ground on our side of the team. But to even go back a little bit further, Jared has always had a passion for aviation. It's been a part of his life for decades, and I had the privilege to meet him when I was on the Thunderbirds when he was starting up a civilian demonstration team. He's a visionary, and I believed in what he was doing as he took that experience and created a company called Draken International, providing adversary support for the DoD. So when I retired, I had an opportunity to work for Jared. And fast forward throughout that experience, his passion for aviation developed into a passion for space. So Jared, based on his success in life, had an opportunity to have conversations with SpaceX, the CFO and Elon. And that was kind of the catalyst for this opportunity that we affectionately labeled Inspiration 4. It was never his desire to just go to space, one and done. It was more of a vision to push the envelope and expand our human endeavor of space exploration. So that got the brain churning, and he came up with the vision, what we call Inspiration 4, that you guys can check out with in Netflix documentary called Countdown. It talks about the whole journey that we went on. It was a very successful. We partnered with a foundation called St. Jude Children's Research Hospital that raised over $250 million because Jared's vision was not only to further space exploration, but it was also to improve our life here on Earth. In the case of partnered with St. Jude, it was all about furthering medicine and healthcare here on Earth. So it was a very successful mission. 3 days he spent on Earth that he can expand upon. But my role on the ground was just to help out, and it involved the selection of his crew. And the idea behind Inspiration 4 was to demonstrate that anyone could go to space, break that glass ceiling. So it was a random selection of the three astronauts, and it was a fast fast-paced experience with SpaceX that involved training that was over a 6 to 7 month period to get them ready for their flight.
Yeah, so it was September of 2021. General Purdy and I were there. We watched the launch, and in fact, shameless plug, the 80s band that's playing tonight, the Spasmatics, was at the launch party for Inspiration 4. So Hippie Wolf was there as well with SFA and saw the band and said, we got to bring that to the first inaugural Spacepower conference. So it was a couple years ago. But anyway, I'll never forget when you splashed down, Jared, and Elon Musk tweeted out, put me down for 50. So $50 million to St. Jude, which got it up to $250 million total. So incredible mission. Jared, it was about coming up on 3 years ago now where you and I sat on a similar stage after the Super Bowl commercial, and we're at the Air Force Academy telling them about this to inspire the next generation of air and space officers as well. And so we're coming up on 3 years there, and now Inspiration 4 is done, it's well documented, and now here we are with Polaris, the Polaris Program. Tell us about Polaris, and we'll dive into Polaris Dawn specifically in a little bit.
Sure. After coming back from Inspiration 4, the whole idea was, to show that it could be done so that you could, for all the exciting missions to follow, and do it in a right and responsible way, and assemble an inspiring crew and raise a lot of money for a cause here on Earth so people don't think that it's all about space and we can destroy our planet here, that we can do both and build an awesome future that we all want to live in and take care of our problems, right? And I thought it was going to end there. I went to Starbase, which is an amazing place for those who haven't been there. It's like a religious experience going there to see this essentially privately funded city that's essentially the gateway to Mars. It's pretty cool. And Elon was there, and we talked about a test and development program, things that definitely appeal to a lot of my interests, to build on things that haven't been done in a long time or never been done before, in order to kind of make that world for where you can have lots of people going into space on lots of starships, and maybe it becomes that 737 of human spaceflight. But there's a lot of things you have to do. You got to go past the comfort zone we've been at for a long time at the space station. You're going to have to go through the Van Allen belts if you want to return to the moon or go to Mars. That's high altitude flights. You're going to need a space suit that's scalable so that when you get to the moon or Mars, that you can actually get outside the safety of your vehicle, and whether you're exploring or constructing something, it can't be the multi-$100 million suits we've had for the last few decades. You're going to need to depend on communication systems outside of the existing national assets of TDRS and ground stations, and leverage the Starlink constellation, which is doing a fantastic job connecting people here on Earth, but can also be connecting various spacecraft vehicles, whether they have people in it or not. And this essentially came to a series of 3 missions called Polaris. Polaris Dawn will actually involve all 3 of those objectives I just talked about. It'll be the highest Earth orbit ever flown. It'll be a spacewalk, venting the vehicle down to vacuum with brand new suits, and then communicating over a Starlink constellation. Second mission will build on those capabilities, essentially certify SpaceX's independent organic EVA capabilities for long operations. And then the third will be the first crewed flight of Starship, which is that vehicle that we all want to kind of open up space for the many.
That's incredible. General Purdy, you're sitting over there smiling, and I know your brain is going 100 miles an hour. When you think of commercial in this sense and human spaceflight, what do you think about?
Yeah, so humans in space, guardians in space, we shouldn't be afraid to think about what that means. And so if you look at industry, if you look at companies like 3M, who allocates personal time to go out on personal projects, the legendary Poteet was born. Google allocates time for individuals to think about that. We as guardians, I think, should spend a little bit of time focused on the future. We, of course, have our day jobs. We have to get after the joint warfight. We have the CSO's competitive endurance to support. We have SECAF's great power competition to get after. But while we have head down and we're looking at these areas, take a little bit of a moment and look to the future and see what's possible. It's happening faster and faster in the commercial area now, in kind of eye-watering speeds. And so I like to so I'm a geek, so we'll go to Marvel. And if you're really a Marvel geek, you know that there's a television series called Marvel What If, right? So it's an animated series. If you haven't seen it, it's amazing. The first couple of episodes are what if Peggy Carter was Captain America? Second is what if T'Challa was Star-Lord? It's a really interesting concept, and so let's apply what if for Guardians. What if Jared and his team are successful multiple times over? What if other companies follow suit? What if we get a commercial space station? What if we get 2 commercial space stations? What if there are many commercial space stations? What happens in that time frame sometime in the future? Is there room, additional room on those stations for Guardians? And what can Guardians do? If you have space stations, you might have refueling depots, you might have depots, you might have warehouses, you might have way stations, could have junkyards. We could take orbital debris and old satellites and repurpose them or even remake new satellites. Can Guardians use that to their advantage to create a strategic or tactical advantage? All of these thoughts, I think, are fascinating kind of what-if exercises for us. And so I'm super encouraged by Inspiration 4 and by the team's accomplishments and by other commercial accomplishments across the sector. So for all Guardians, as you keep in touch with what industry is doing at the bleeding edge, and you think about what they're doing, think about also how can we leverage and how can we take advantage of it.
Yeah, it's perfect, and I think Jared and Kid here are leading by example there. But as you saw in the video, there's a lot of training that they not only did in Inspiration 4, and our Guardians are, we're going to up our game on the Guardian side with our training as well. Just like all the other domains, that those training ranges are very important. But I want Kid to talk a little bit about the training that you guys have been through recently for the Polaris Dawn mission, which is currently scheduled for around April. We all know we've all been hoping for the launch the past couple days. We know how this goes. This is not a simple mission. This is not going up for 2 to 3 minutes and becoming weightless. This is a very complicated mission, as you saw. So can you talk to us about the training first of all, tell us about the remainder of the crew that's not here, why they're important, why they're on the crew, and then about the training you four have done.
Absolutely. So our crew consists of 4 astronauts. The 2 individuals that are not here is Anna Menon and Sarah Gillis. Sarah was the lead trainer that taught Jared how to be an astronaut. She has been an engineer for quite a few years at SpaceX. She is our resident expert when we're in the simulator, sometimes teaching the teacher, because that's her background, and she's just brilliant. And Anna, she has a background, started off at NASA, and now she is an engineer as well at SpaceX. They are both mission specialists. Anna's background, she is responsible for writing a lot of the procedures that we are exercising when we're in the simulator. So based on that crew, you got Jared, you got Anna, and you got Sarah with their backgrounds, and then I'm bringing up the rear as the LEMFAC on this crew. But as far as the training's concerned, it is a developmental program. It's just not to go to space and come back down. The overall objective is to kind of bridge that gap between, help identify some of these challenges associated with long-duration spaceflight. So we've set the objectives for Polaris Dawn, the highest altitude since Gemini 11, the first commercial EVA, the first test of laser-based communication with Starlink from space, and then science and research, which right now we have about 40 different experiments that we've identified that we're going to participate in. But overall, not too far off of what we experienced in the military, what I went through with pilot training and weapons school. You start off with the basic building block approach, skill sets, learning the systems, the procedures, all things that we're fairly familiar with. From there, you kind of go into the contingencies. You start working as a team, going through some of the basic simulators of just crew. And then as we start working through these more mature phases, it's joint simulators where we're incorporating mission control, going through all phases of flight, the launch, while we're on orbit, the EVA, as well as the deorbit phase, to include all the contingencies that we could experience while we're up there. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We have training next week at headquarters. And we spend a lot of our time, very similar to what NASA did for generations, kind of taking some experiential learning of doing certain risky things to get comfortable in uncomfortable scenarios. So we fly fighter jets, thanks to Jared. We've skydived, thanks to SFA setting that up at the Academy. We do scuba diving. We've climbed mountains, Cotopaxi down in Ecuador. And that allows us to be uncomfortable together, working as a team, figuring out strengths as well as a lot of weaknesses that we experience amongst the crew.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of parallels to the integrated mission deltas we've been talking about this week. That teamwork where you have to be sitting side by side. Jared, Kid bragged about you early on. I'm going to give you a chance to brag about Kid. he talked about risky training, but he failed to mention the elective surgery that he had this past summer. Can you tell the crowd here what Kid elected to do, the big picture, why it was historic, and then we'll...
Yeah, sure. So, there's been a hero image of going into space for a while because you don't talk about some of the more unpleasant things. The reality that at minimum 50% of the crew is going to experience what's called space adaptation syndrome. You can get some sense of this if you read some of the books from the Gemini and Apollo days, but people get very, very sick and they have to be treated. It's not necessarily taking a pill, it usually involves shots. Then you have, you go down in like even smaller percentages of things that can go wrong. One of which is various vision-related challenges. And a lot of it is attributed to fluid shifts in the body, increase in intracranial pressure. And there's a lot of, ways to test for it. For example, we have a number of ocular tests that, try and back into intracranial pressure, but like what is the holy grail test that the flight surgeons want is basically to implant a pressure transducer into your spine and take direct measurements of it. Now, again, the world that we're in that's changing right now, when it was, it's all government astronauts, there's not a great desire to take too many risks with your own health because it could impact your flight status. So you come back from a mission, I'm great. Or if there are tests that are being done, it's just essentially government employees, very little of that data is made public. But this is the nice thing about commercial space right now. And Kid, volunteered for one of those invasive tests involving that pressure transducer. And, it was the surgery did not go as well, which was a great risk that he took. But it's a step in the right direction. It's an example of some of the opportunities to learn that we otherwise haven't because we need to. We've never done open surgery in space right now. There's no childbirth in space. I mean, all these things that are essentially going to be a reality if you're going to Mars and staying there and coming back. And in the current construct, the way at least it's been historically, we're never going to get to that data, and no one's incentivized to do it. And Kid took some pretty big risks along the way for that. So.
Yeah, it's the personal risk that Kid took. As Jared said, the surgery didn't go so well. He was back under the knife a couple weeks later to undo the surgery. But that's the point here is this team is pushing the envelope to get those commercial capabilities. And I want to shift a little bit to the actual three series, the three missions of Polaris. And Jared, can you explain what the actual profile is this time? And then let's go through number 2 and number 3 as well.
So the first one, Polaris Dawn, which we announced almost 2 years ago, which should launch hopefully in April. As Kid mentioned, you have a couple primary objectives. One, it'll be the highest Earth orbit ever flown, so probably insert somewhere around 1,200 by 190, go up to 1,400. Now the purpose there is you're getting very close to the Van Allen radiation belts. Along with a number of side benefits, you can imagine a reentry profile from 1,400 kilometers is a different energy state than if you were at 400 kilometers at the International Space Station. So some good things to solve there, but mostly you're going to get some good data. We'll do about 7 orbits at 1,400, it's basically radiation data. So we all know in here avionics don't necessarily like radiation, so you can harden for it, but that comes at a mass penalty, right? So we have a different architecture in Dragon. We'll see if that scales up for Starship. We'll come down after about 7 laps. To give you a sense, by the way, even in that 190 by 1,400, so a very low perigee, 7 orbits at that altitude is the radiation exposure equivalent of 3 months on the space station. So then we'll come down to about 700, 750 kilometers. That's where we'll do our spacewalk. Dragon does not have an airlock, so we'll vent the entire cabin down to vacuum. We'll go out with brand new SpaceX suits, EVA suits, basically in development for 2 years. This is important. They envision a future that's more exciting when people can journey among the stars. You're going to need a lot of spacesuits. They shouldn't cost hundreds of millions. They should cost a lot less and be scalable. We'll be testing the first iteration of those suits out. And then our third is we'll communicate over laser links with Starlink. And then we have about 40 science and research experiments over the 5 days, essentially, that our life support systems can sustain the vehicle. So that's Polaris Dawn. Polaris 2 should build off of that. Some may be familiar. There's a study to rendezvous with Hubble, boost it, leave it a little bit healthier, give it a chance to operate alongside James Webb for a couple decades longer, and then maybe we go up and get it in a Starship and drop it in the Smithsonian someday. It'd be pretty cool. So that's in NASA's hands to decide if they want us to touch their telescope. I'd say the risk-reward is pretty favorable for it, not to mention builds awesome capabilities for commercial space that's going to be required for our future. And then the third mission will be the first crewed flight of Starship. We got some time on that, but that's pretty exciting. As everyone knows, that'll be the game changer, right? I think about, by the way, not to get off track, but the Space Force. It feels like our experience as human beings within space up until now has been the equivalent of paddling around in a canoe. And what's going to happen when Starship comes online, and you, Glenn, everybody else who's working on this type of fully reusable capability that can be essentially mass-produced at scale, is like going from that canoe to thousands of steam ocean liners crossing the great oceans. There's not going to be a whole lot in between, right? And we're not the only ones interested in this. So for me, it's a great appreciation for the Guardians that are providing like the safety, security, and the oversight of what is going to transform in a pretty material way in a very, very short period of time.
Yeah, it's just incredible how he just quickly went through those 3 missions. And everybody, I looked out, you guys are like, what? You're going to do what? But that's the thinking that they're taking. That's the thinking that we should be taking. General Purdy, we got to bring this. We are the Space Force Association, so let's bring it back to national security a little bit. When you think of Starship, and when you think of what he just said, again, what's on your mind? What is, play the same Marvel game. What if? What can we do? We have a pacing challenge in China. We have an acute threat in Russia. And I know these gentlemen are very familiar with kind of their peers in China, but it's really not peers. But give us your thoughts when you think of Starship.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned 1,000 ships. Essentially, we're really the beneficiary of an amazing turn of events. In the other domains, you don't see so much money going, I would argue, so much money going into those domains. Many times the DoD has to push money into those domains. In space, we find ourselves not in that situation, and in fact, reversed. There is so much money going in through venture capital, through private investment in space. It's really eye-watering when you think about it. And so it's the job of us as Guardians, in particular our acquisition, our S5, our futures sides, to catch up to that, to track that activity, and then play the what-if game. And so if you've got all of this capability and money pouring in, if you've got launch, right now, what were we, 10 years ago, we had a couple of launches a year, and we're looking at over 100 here, if not this year, then next year probably. Vandenberg went public a few weeks ago talking about 100 launches at Vandenberg a few years from now. Who would have ever thought of that? And that is driven by commercial. And so let's just continue that trend and think about it. We not only need to think about the launch side and the ground side, but the space side, and then you extrapolate out into space. And so if you've got rockets launching on a near commodity basis on nearly daily at this point, if you combine everyone together, again, the Marvel game of what if. Like, there is so much capacity going into orbit. How do you take advantage of that? How do you mass produce on the ground satellites and payloads and not take the kinds of long period of times that we had them before, and we toss things on there? And then how do you, in a commodity, almost a Model T type factory, you're now receiving that in orbit, and now you're probably going to get into, if you're delivering mass in low Earth orbit, and mining companies have started talking about pumping up tons of equipment, of mining equipment in low Earth orbit so they can get after mining, which is a pretty wild idea. That's been in the realm of science fiction, but it's soon going to be reality with that kind of a pace. And so if you have that activity going on, that's where you start talking about you're going to have pretty heavy infrastructure in orbit to support all that. That activity is you're going to have a lot of stations, a lot of those depots I talked about. So then again, you talk about how do we leverage that in terms of the capacity for launch, the capacity and the throughput. In the old days, trains, I like to use other domains. Trains were a major element of warfare in terms of moving around tanks and equipment, and they were critical. And so we've always talked about the freight train to space and always dreamed about it. The freight train has caught up to us, is about to pass us by in reality. And so how do you develop on the commercial side, leverage some of the commercial mass production that's going on, And then how do you leverage that into space, not only with satellites, but potentially humans or all of that data floating around? And then how do you extrapolate out? So obviously we're talking about LEO at first, but you all are talking about going farther and farther out. So we've talked about GEO, we've talked about HEO, you talk about lunar, you talk about lunar Lagrange points and all those pieces. Again, those are futurist kind of discussions, but they're happening faster and faster. So while we focus on the here and now, and while we focus on leveraging capacity, and the here and now is an easy leverage. There are companies that are mass producing satellites and payloads, and there are companies that are getting ready to mass produce rockets. All the pieces are falling into place. So we leverage that, and all of a sudden we talk about responsive launch. Could literally be putting a satellite together over a weekend or two and suddenly launching it. That is a completely different paradigm than it was in the past. And now that data is streaming down. But then also think about, okay, now I have thousands and thousands of these one-off satellites or satellites that we pushed up into space. Now all this data is coming at us like a freight train. So how are we managing all this data throughput, and how are we managing how to make sense of all this data? Very quickly, when you've commoditized all the hardware, the software becomes the key, and making sense out of that data becomes key, which is why you see a lot of movement in our world into getting after software and data pieces. So it wouldn't be naturally obvious to think about that and software and data analysis as the first step and the first key piece, but that's kind of where you drive to when you start thinking about that.
Absolutely. I wanted the team here to know, about 2 years ago, Jared, you and I were back at the Air Force Academy after Inspiration 4, and you and your wife, Monica, brought second lieutenant rank that you flew to space and gave it to every Guardian that was going into the Space Force, graduating from the Air Force Academy. That's the relationship that we've had with Jared and the team with SFA for a few years now. But when you look at Starship, and I want you to tell the group here why you went to the most recent launch, what you guys did, and then when you look at that thing go from a national security standpoint, what goes through your mind?
Yeah. Well, first, give credit where it's proper due. It was Kid's awesome idea to fly the Space Force rank on Inspiration 4, and we were really proud to do it. And look,
We got a couple hundred more for this next mission too.
Yeah. I say a lot of things that are very, very complimentary about SpaceX. First, they safely put me into space and brought me back. So from the get-go, I owe a lot to them on that. We were Crew 2 hadn't even come home yet before Inspiration 4 launched. It was pretty forward-leaning to undertake that mission then. But really, when I say these things that are very complimentary about SpaceX, it's only because I wish to see that same type of innovation and drive to execute with urgency across the entire defense industry. As Kid mentioned, I was one of the co-founders of Draken, so for 10 years we were professional bad guys in the air, and got a firsthand view of just how much the adversaries had closed the gaps in our capabilities, and is why. Why does that happen? I think maybe a lot of consolidation in the defense industry is certainly part of it. But then I see examples of SpaceX that have had to fight, claw, kick, sue their way to a current position to for the benefit of our nation, and really in a lot of ways for humankind. But let's just from the Patriot perspective zero in. I'd love to see that same thing happen across the defense industry. It doesn't have to be SpaceX, but it should be the right mindset and attitude. I say all this because what's happening in Starbase Texas with Starship, and I know people in this room can appreciate, will be, probably one of the greatest transformational leaps in transportation ever, but maybe one of the greatest accomplishments for our nation. And right now, at times, because of one, we may overlook the accomplishments of thousands that are doing really, really incredible things. And man, we need it, right? Even with Starship, right? There is a very good chance we don't get back to the moon before China does right now. Even without reusability, the pace that they're putting things into orbit right now is very, very impressive. They will eventually get reusability, right? So, I'm all for all the amazing things that we can be accomplishing in space. If we overlook the transport side of this revolution that's happening right now, then what we're going to overlook next is the space economy that will develop because of it. Because we don't know what it is yet, but it'll certainly happen because for once, you're actually going to be able to experiment with things in space. And whether it's, who knows, like 3D printing organs, or it's mining, or it's something else, there's going to be a reason, a big reason why you're going to want to have people in space, why you're going to have more investment going into space, and it may not be us that get there first if we don't figure it out. So I think Starship is like an incredible step in that direction at times. Like we need to get behind it for sure. Let's not celebrate the failure of a launch, but everything they accomplished as a result of it. And then let's hopefully seed a whole lot more, SpaceX-like companies around the defense industry, because we could use it.
That's a good point. Kid, I mentioned that you guys obviously are tracking what China is doing. And we like to say civil, commercial, national security space. Talk to us your thoughts on, if you want to call them your Chinese counterparts, on what they're doing and what you think their goals are. Tell us your thoughts on that.
Well, they got an entire government behind them to develop and infuse all this funding to get the advancement that they're accomplishing. We collectively need to rely upon each other. We have NASA, we got Space Force, we got commercial entities within the U.S. I think it's a synergistic collaboration that we need to focus in on in order for us to advance the needle. Back in my day, when we replicate China, Russia, it was at the very elementary level. This is the big leagues. And it's very reassuring, coming from the background that I have, and going to witness what, we'll pick on SpaceX, because that's our pride and joy. What they're accomplishing on a daily basis is amazing. The innovation, and it's not just what we see training to go to space. It's everything else that they're accomplishing with Starshield and Starlink. The passion that they have and their ability to efficiently produce what they do with technology and innovation is very reassuring. I'm lucky enough to see behind the scenes of what they're working on. But I think the answer for us is that collaboration, working together, because it's inevitable. I mean, multiplanetary existence and continuing to push the envelope on space exploration, it's going to happen. That train is moving. We just need to be in front of it.
Thanks. And for the audience, we had an unclassed threat brief yesterday. These gentlemen have top secret clearances. I think that's important to notice. As defense industry and government, it's important to know that they are read in. These are gentlemen that have knowledge of what's going on, and they're trying to push this this level for national security reasons. General Purdy, we got a couple minutes left. I'm going to give each of you an opportunity to share some thoughts to the Guardians' last-minute words.
Yeah, building upon this, now we're in Guardian territory, talking about the current competitive threat and fight. That is definitely the focus, but let's keep an eye on what we got to do. We have a lot of work that we need to do in the current world, in the current fight. CSO's competitive advantage, as I mentioned, and SecAF's great power competition is exceedingly important in kind of the discussion of our times. But there's also this interesting future. And so let me give a huge nod to all of our industry partners and all of our commercial partners out there. We have been, Space Force is bounded with industry and commercial and has been for years. On the acquisition side, commercial and commercial-like activity through launch and commercial SATCOM, space domain awareness activity, and then on operations, commercial involvement in Schriever and in Vandenberg has been legendary and has been exceedingly helpful. So we're looking to expound upon that in the OSD commercial thought pieces and CSO's commercial strategies. We're looking to do nothing but double down on all that. The SSC's commercial office is a huge step forward in trying to get us there. So I really want to thank all our industry partners and our commercial partners. We can't do this without you. It's incredibly important. And I ask you to help us with today's fight, but also help us think 10 years out about what could be.
Thank you.
And then let me just finish also for our Guardians, a challenge to them. You have professional military education opportunities. Spend a little bit of time thinking about that future. Today's thought pieces could be tomorrow's ops. And so I ask you to think through that.
Good. Kid?
I just appreciate the opportunity to come share this little sliver that we're participating in. I'm very thankful for my career in the Air Force. I admire what you guys are accomplishing within the Space Force. And knowing what I come from and what I get to see today, watching guys like General O'Shaughnessy do great things, I just look forward to the collaborations that we can do in the future.
Thanks. Close us out, Jared.
Yeah, I just incredibly appreciative, especially to all the guardians. The room is, as Kid said, like the train is leaving the station. The commercial space industry has already unlocked so much potential now with reusability. Like the number of launches every year will just continue to increase exponentially. Everything is changing. It's super exciting and it's scary at the same time, right? And somebody has to be looking out for us and looking out for everybody else that's out there, right? I've seen now what like a micrometeorite at 8 kilometers a second can do to a spacesuit, and it doesn't look good. I know there's a lot of people on console and a lot of people looking at screens that are making sure that we're safe when we're up there, but also like the hundreds and thousands that'll follow in this awesome new frontier that we're opening. So thank you very much.